He was making me tea every single morning. That was the thing. Every morning, without fail, my daughter-in-law would be in my kitchen before I even came downstairs, and there would be a mug sitting on the counter, steam still rising, waiting for me. I thought it was kindness. I thought I was the luckiest man alive. My name is Eugene. I'm 63 years old, and until about 14 months ago, I was in better shape than most men half my age. I hiked on weekends. I did crossword puzzles to keep my mind sharp. I remembered every birthday in my family without writing a single one down. I had retired 2 years earlier from 31 years as a civil engineer for the county, and I had a pension, a paid-off house in Asheville, North Carolina, and what I thought was a good relationship with my son and his wife. I want you to understand who I was before all of this, because what happened to me didn't happen to a frail old man who didn't know what day it was. It happened to me. Someone who had built roads and bridges for a living. Someone who knew how to read blueprints and calculate load-bearing weight and spot a flaw in a structure before it became a catastrophe. I missed every single sign. My son Oliver moved back to Asheville with his wife Diane about 2 years after I retired. He was 34 at the time. She was 31. They'd been living in Charlotte, where Oliver worked as a financial advisor, and when his firm opened a smaller satellite office closer to the mountains, he jumped at the chance to relocate. He told me he wanted to be closer to family. He said Diane had always loved the Asheville area. He said they were thinking about starting a family and wanted roots. I believed all of it. Oliver had always been a good kid. Quiet. Careful. He thought before he spoke, which I always respected, because I was the opposite. I talked first and thought later, and spent a lot of my life apologizing for it. His mother, my late wife Patricia. No, wait. I was told not to use that name. His mother, my late wife Joanne, died when Oliver was 19, and the two of us had navigated that grief together in a way that bonded us. We didn't talk about feelings much. We fixed things. We built a deck together the summer after she died. We tore it down and rebuilt it when we realized we'd miscalculated the slope. We didn't talk about why we needed to keep our hands busy. We just understood each other. When he brought Diane home for the first time, 3 years before any of this happened, I tried to like her. I really did. She was pretty in an assembled kind of way, the kind of pretty that takes effort and planning. She laughed at the right moments and asked me questions about my work and remembered what I'd told her the next time she saw me. She was attentive in the way that a person is attentive when they're paying attention on purpose. I told myself I was being unfair. I told myself I was one of those fathers who would never think any woman was good enough for his son. I pushed the feeling down, and I smiled, and I welcomed her into my home. That was my first mistake, I suppose. But it's hard to call it a mistake when it looked so much like love. The tea started about 6 weeks after they moved in. They weren't living with me. I want to be clear about that. They had rented an apartment on the other side of town while they looked for a house to buy. But they were over at my place constantly. Oliver had always used my garage workshop on weekends, and that habit continued. Diane started joining him. Then she started coming by, even when Oliver was working, just to check in on me, she said. Bring me something from the farmer's market. Keep me company. The tea was her idea. She said she'd read that a specific blend of herbs was good for joint inflammation, and she'd noticed I'd been rubbing my knee after my hikes. Valerian root, she said. Passion flower. Chamomile. Good for sleep, too. She ordered it online and started brewing it fresh every morning. Within 3 weeks, I was sleeping 10 hours a night. I thought I was finally catching up on the rest I'd lost during my working years. I told my doctor at my annual checkup that I was sleeping better than I had in decades. He said that sounded great. He didn't ask what had changed. Within 6 weeks, I started having trouble with words. Not big words, simple ones. I'd be talking and the word I wanted would just slip, like trying to grab smoke. I'd stand in the grocery store and forget what I'd come for. I started writing lists, which I'd never needed before. I chalked it up to age, to finally slowing down. Oliver and Diane chalked it up to the same thing. Dad, you've been running at full speed your whole life, Oliver told me one Sunday, watching me search for my reading glasses that turned out to be on my own face. Your brain is just decompressing. It's normal. He said it so calmly, so reasonably. I believed him. The changes came slowly enough that there was always an explanation. I started feeling unsteady on my hikes, so I stopped hiking. Diane found me a good walking stick at an antique shop. I started losing track of conversations midway through, so I started asking people to repeat themselves. Oliver installed some kind of app on my phone that he said would help me manage my calendar and my medications. I'd been taking a mild blood pressure medication for 2 years, nothing serious, and he took over scheduling my doctor appointments so I wouldn't forget them. He drove me to most of them. Looking back, I can see it so clearly. The careful, gradual transfer of every piece of my independence. But here is the thing about something that happens slowly. You don't feel it happening. You feel the individual moments. You feel tired on a Tuesday. You feel foggy on a Wednesday. You feel grateful on a Thursday that someone remembered to refill your prescription when you forgot. None of those moments feel like a pattern. They feel like life. And Diane was so good at making it feel like love. She would squeeze my shoulder when she brought the tea. She called me Pop, which I'd told her once I'd always wished I had a grandkid to call me. She framed a photo from my last hiking trip before I got too unsteady. Just a simple wooden frame, sitting on my bookshelf, and I didn't even realize until much later that it was also a subtle reminder of what I could no longer do. I don't think Oliver knew everything his wife was doing. I want to say that because it matters to me. I don't think he understood the full plan, but I also know he didn't ask questions, and when you don't ask questions, you become part of the answer. The morning everything changed was a Tuesday in October. I had gone to my neighborhood library, which I still did every Tuesday because it was 2 blocks away and the routine felt important to me, something to hold on to. I had checked out a mystery novel and sat in one of the reading chairs for about an hour, which was usually enough before I got tired. On the way home, I felt it, the way I'd been feeling it more and more, a kind of thickness behind my eyes, a weightiness in my limbs that wasn't quite fatigue. I sat down on the bench outside the library to let it pass. It didn't pass. I remember looking at the oak tree across the street and thinking that the leaves were very beautiful and very orange, and then I don't remember anything else until I heard a voice saying my name. Sir, can you hear me? Eugene, is your name Eugene? Is your name Eugene? I opened my eyes. A woman was crouching in front of me. She had grey hair pulled back in a clip, and she was wearing a lanyard with an ID badge. She was holding my wrist, not in a frightening way, more like she was checking my pulse, and her expression was very focused, professional, the way a person looks when they're thinking hard and don't have time to perform reassurance. What happened? I said. My voice came out slow and thick. You were unconscious for about 4 minutes. I called 911. They're on their way. She hadn't let go of my wrist. I'm a retired pharmacist. I was coming out of the library. I saw you fall. I started to sit up straighter. She let me. She watched me carefully. I'm fine, I said, which was what I always said. You might be, she said. But I'd like to ask you something first, if that's okay. I nodded. How long have you been drinking valerian root tea? I stared at her. My daughter-in-law makes it for me, I said. Every morning, for about 8 months now. She was quiet for a moment. She looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Not pity, exactly, but something careful and deliberate, like she was choosing how much to say. Valerian root in small amounts is generally safe, she said, but it can interact significantly with certain medications, including blood pressure medication, and in sustained daily doses, in certain combinations, it can cause exactly what you've been experiencing: cognitive dulling, memory issues, fatigue, dependence. Even, in some cases, the person taking it often doesn't realize because the onset is very gradual. The oak tree across the street was very still. Your daughter-in-law, she said carefully. Does she know what medications you take? I thought about the app on my phone. The prescription refills Oliver managed. Diane standing in my kitchen every morning, her back to me, preparing something she told me would help. Yes, I said. She knows exactly what medications I take. Her name was Helen. Helen Marsh. She had worked as a pharmacist in Buncombe County for 37 years before retiring, and she had, in that time, seen a handful of cases of what she called inadvertent medication interaction. And 2 cases, she told me quietly, that were not inadvertent at all. She sat with me until the paramedics arrived. She spoke to them. She gave them her name and number and told them what she'd observed and what she suspected. The young paramedic looked skeptical. She looked at him with the patience of someone who has been underestimated many times and has learned to simply wait for people to catch up. At the hospital, a physician ran a full panel on me for the first time in 2 years. My previous checkups had been routine: blood pressure check, cholesterol, the basics. Nobody had looked for anything else because nobody had been given reason to look. The results showed sustained elevated sedation markers, evidence of prolonged herbal compound interaction with my blood pressure medication. The doctor, a woman in her 50s with reading glasses pushed up on her head, sat across from me and spoke in very measured language about what she was and was not able to conclude. But her eyes said something different. I called Oliver from the hospital room. I told him what had happened, where I was. He arrived 45 minutes later. Diane was with him. She walked in looking like concern, which I had once found so comforting. The slightly too wide eyes. The hand on my arm. Pop, we were so scared. She smelled like the same lavender she always wore. I looked at her and felt something I couldn't name for a moment. Then I recognized it. It was the feeling of a structure failing. That particular sick lurch, when something you built, something you were certain of, comes apart in a way that can't be fixed. "I'd like you to wait outside," I told her. She blinked. "Pop." "Please," I said. Oliver looked between us. He didn't say anything. He walked Diane to the hallway and came back alone, and I watched his face very carefully as I told him what Helen Marsh had told me. He went pale in stages. I watched denial move through him, and then something else. Not quite guilt, but close to it. The look of someone who has been carefully not asking questions and has just realized why. I won't tell you the next few weeks were simple. They weren't. Oliver and I had a series of conversations that I'm not sure either of us will ever fully recover from. Not because of anger exactly, but because of the specific grief of realizing that love can coexist with blindness. That someone can love you and still choose convenience over truth. He hadn't known the extent of what Diane had been doing. I believe that. But he had known something was wrong with my health and had accepted the easy explanation rather than pushing on it. He had let her manage my medications and my appointments and my daily routine because it made his life simpler. He cried the second time we talked. I didn't. I didn't have anything left in me for crying about it. I was too busy being angry and then too busy being methodical, which is always what I do when I'm angry. Helen Marsh connected me with an attorney she knew. A real estate attorney who also handled elder law, a serious woman named, well, I'll call her my attorney because this isn't her story. What mattered was that she helped me understand what had happened and what my options were. What we learned, through the investigation that followed, was this. Diane had been quietly building a case for guardianship. She had documented my cognitive lapses, the word forgetting, the memory gaps, the unsteadiness, carefully, systematically, in a journal she kept on her laptop. She had consulted a lawyer in Charlotte 6 months after they moved to Asheville about the process for establishing guardianship over an elderly parent. She had told that lawyer that she was concerned about her father-in-law's mental decline. My house was paid off and worth $430,000 in the current Asheville market. My pension paid me $4,200 a month. I had a modest investment portfolio, around $260,000, that Oliver, as my financial advisor, managed. I don't know exactly when Diane decided I was an opportunity rather than a person. I suspect it was gradual, the same way everything she did was gradual. The same patience she'd applied to the tea, she'd applied to the plan. The charges took time. These things always do. What eventually stuck: criminal elder abuse under North Carolina law, intentional administration of a substance known to cause harm, fraud related to the guardianship scheme. Her attorney argued that the tea was well-intentioned and the guardianship inquiry was simply prudent planning. The prosecutor disagreed, and so did the evidence on her laptop. Diane pleaded guilty to a reduced charge. She served 8 months and was released on supervised probation. I was told by people who handle these cases that 8 months is, unfortunately, Not unusual for this kind of crime. I was told that elder financial abuse and elder medical abuse are chronically undercharged, underreported, and undersentenced. I'm telling you that because I think you should know it. Oliver and I. That's harder to explain. He was not charged with anything because there was no legal basis to charge him. He had been negligent and complicit in the way that someone is complicit when they look away. We have spoken. We have not fully repaired things, and I'm honest enough to say, I don't know if we will. Love doesn't disappear because someone disappoints you, but trust, once it fractures like that, leaves a different shape behind. We're learning to live with the shape. I stopped the tea the day Helen Marsh told me what it was doing. It took about 3 months for the cognitive fog to fully lift. 3 months of waking up and feeling the difference, day by day, in small increments. Words came back. I went back to the library every Tuesday. I started hiking again. Nothing too strenuous at first, just the shorter trails with a walking stick, then without. The crossword puzzles came back, the birthdays, the feeling of being fully present inside my own life. Helen became a friend. She's 71, and opinionated, and laughs loudly, and does not suffer fools, and she came to my first post-recovery hike and complained the entire time about the root systems on the trail being a liability lawsuit waiting to happen, and it was the best 2 hours I'd had in a year. I'm 63 years old. I live alone in my house in Asheville with my paid-off mortgage and my view of the mountains and my Tuesday library trips, and I am here to tell you something that I wish someone had told me before any of this happened. Kindness that asks for nothing in return is usually just kindness, but kindness that positions itself between you and your own life, that manages your medications and your appointments and your mornings and your memory, is worth looking at twice, not because people can't love you without an agenda, but because love doesn't require access to everything. Real love doesn't need to be in charge. I was a civil engineer for 31 years. I know what a load-bearing structure looks like. I know what it looks like when the weight is distributed correctly and when it isn't. I know the difference between a foundation and a trap. I just didn't think I'd have to use that knowledge on my own family. I'm telling you this now because I found my way back, because Helen Marsh was walking out of a library at the right moment, because a retired pharmacist with a lanyard and 37 years of experience looked at an old man on a bench and saw something that didn't add up and decided to do something about it. Not everyone gets that moment. I did, and I'm not going to waste it. If you're watching this right now, and something in you recognized any part of what I just described, not the dramatic parts, but the quiet parts, the gradual parts, the gradual parts, the parts where someone slowly took over piece by piece while you told yourself it was love, please hear me. You're allowed to ask questions. You're allowed to see your own doctor alone. You're allowed to know what's in your cup. You built your life. It belongs to you. Where are you watching from today? I'd love to know you're out there. Leave it in the comments below, and if this story hit close to home, share it with someone you think might need to hear it. Thank you for being here with me tonight. I've thought a lot about what made all of this possible, not just Diane's plan, but my own willingness to accept the story she offered me, and I keep coming back to the same thing. I wanted it to be true. I wanted to believe that my son had built a good life, that his wife was kind, that the family I had left was whole and safe. That wanting, that need, is what she used against me. Not a weapon exactly, more like a door I left unlocked. There's a version of myself that would be ashamed of that, an earlier version, maybe, who thought being smart meant never being fooled. I was an engineer for 3 decades. I calculated stress tolerances for a living. I believed in evidence and math and things you could measure, and yet I couldn't see what was happening in my own kitchen every morning because I didn't want to look. That's not stupidity. I've had to sit with that for a while before I could say it without it feeling like an excuse. But I believe it now. It's something else, a kind of moral optimism, I suppose. The assumption that people who say they love you are telling the truth. That assumption isn't a flaw. But it does require maintenance. It requires the occasional willingness to ask the question you don't want to ask. What Diane did had its own logic to it. She was patient. She was methodical. She built something over months, the same way you build anything, one layer at a time. And because each layer looked like care, I accepted it. Each cup of tea looked like thoughtfulness. Each managed appointment looked like help. Each documented lapse looked, from the inside, like aging. The action and the cover story were identical. That's the sophistication of it, and I think that's also what makes it so common and so rarely punished. Elder abuse that wears the face of family love is almost invisible until something breaks. Something broke. I hit that bench outside the library, and Helen Marsh was walking out the door at the right moment, and that was the hinge everything turned on. I am aware of how fragile that is. One different Tuesday, and the story ends differently. What I want to say about Oliver is harder. He didn't pour anything into my cup. He didn't open a laptop and research guardianship law, but he managed my money and my medications and my schedule, and he answered his wife's version of events rather than his own instincts. And that is a choice, even when it doesn't feel like one. Choosing comfort over truth is still a choice. Living inside an easy explanation rather than the harder real one is still a decision you make, every day, until the decision is made for you. He and I are still finding our way. Some days I think we'll get there. Other days I'm not sure what there. Other days I'm not sure what there even looks like anymore. But I know that whatever we rebuild, it will have to be built on something more honest than what came before. That's not a punishment. That's just what real things are made of. I'm 63. I hike on Tuesdays now. I make my own tea, plain black. Nothing in it, but water and time. Helen came with me last week and complained about the trail conditions the entire way up, and I laughed until my sides hurt, and that laughter felt like something I had earned. You earn your way back to yourself. It doesn't happen because someone rescues you, though sometimes someone does. It happens because you decide that your life, your mind, your mornings, your cup, belongs to you. And then you act like it does. I'm still acting like it does. Every single day,